Hello and welcome to the National Road Safety Partnership Program webinar, Making Strategy Work. My name is Jerome Carslake. Oh, there I am. My name is Jerome Carslake. I'm Director of the National Road Safety Partnership Program and its many activities. To find out more around the program, please register for our newsletter and follow us on LinkedIn. So our webinar today is going to go for around 60 minutes. We're going to take questions interactively throughout. And as you can see, I've got Brett sitting here right next to me. So it's going to make it a lot more interactive. And we actually haven't really got a PowerPoint. It's going to be more of a discussion drawing on the thought leadership paper that we've kindly developed that's going to guide the whole session. So, So for those of you who are new to Zoom, and that is a bit of a problem for some people with your custom teams or other sort of mechanisms, please use the question button and you can throw responses in there. The chat is open to everyone as well, and you can also upvote as you go along. So joining us today is Brett. G'day, Brett.
G'day, Jerome.
You may have remember Brett from any number of other webinars that we've done. And the reason we actually got two here is because this one, we were looking at doing one around culture and leadership and realized the task was too big. So Brett's our local linguistic. I stuffed that up, didn't I?
Just a little.
Yeah. And he's got an amazing background in, and key thing for really that I've come to learn working from Brett is really how language is key to everything. If you can understand that, people can understand the basics of it. It's going to make everything easy to get on buying where you're going along the way. So thank you very much for joining us. Let's get rid of this PowerPoint. Let's dive on in, shall we? Over to you, Brett. Whoops.
Okay.
Oh, we stopped sharing. Sorry about this. There we go. We're away now.
All right.
So tell us about strategy. I believe it comes right back to language.
It always does with us because we're linguists, so we're going to follow that line no matter what. But in terms of strategy, we always start with the language. Those of you who have attended webinars that we've run previously on culture and things like that, and culture and strategy, incidentally, have a very close, important relationship that we'll explain later. But strategy is a Greek word. It comes, the stem is strategos. All strategy comes from war. So that's the first thing to understand. Strategy evolved from war. So strategos is not only the word for strategy in Greek, it's also the word for general. It's exactly the same word. And that just to give you an indication of how closely linked these things are. Strategos is actually made up of two words, stratos and argos. Now, the first of these, stratos, was usually thought of as an army, but quite literally what it means is things spread out over a distance. So you'll be familiar with the term strata, as in strata title for property, same thing, right? Spread out over a distance in different areas. An apartment building, for example, it's layered. So that's what that means. It means things spread out over a distance. Argos means leader. So when you talk about strategy, what you're really talking about is your ability to lead things or people spread out over a distance to a particular objective or goal. So that's what strategy actually is. And the interesting thing about it is that strategy and leadership are intertwined. They go together. They're not separate. A lot of companies tend to separate these things out. That is absolutely the wrong thing to do.
So they're both
one and the same thing, essentially. That is one of the primary roles of a leader. That's why the term leader is actually built into the word itself. So you've got to understand that these things go together. So strategos means things spread out over a distance with someone leading it to a particular outcome or objective. That's what you're trying to do. The difficulty, of course, is that now you understand what it really is. According to McKinsey's research, 70% of all strategies fail.
Why is that?
Because they don't make sense. In very, very blunt terms. When you look at most strategies, they're incredibly complicated. They're very difficult to read. They're way too long. It's hard to find what it is you're supposed to do. And if there's one thing that you should understand in a strategy, it's what you are supposed to do. So we see a lot of strategies that have been developed by our friends at the Big Four, so EY, PwC, Deloitte, and so on. What they all tend to have in common is they're very long, they're very convoluted, and it's almost impossible to figure out what the hell you're supposed to be doing. And essentially what a lot of people do is they leave the thinking behind. They don't realize that strategy needs to be at a top level, and they get into all the operational planning where all the technical stuff happens and it overwhelms people, and they don't understand the relationship between what's right in front of them and what they're ultimately trying to achieve. And as a result, strategy just goes by the wayside. So a lot of people in organizations hate strategy because they just see it as a giant waste of time. It's just annoying. It just gets in the way. You know, it's something that they have to go on a retreat for 4 days or whatever.
But is strategy just something for the leaders though?
Well, see, this is the thing. See, language again, right? You go, yes, it is, but what's a leader? And one of the issues with leadership is we tend to think of leadership as just being the hierarchy. So we tend to think of leadership purely as authority, okay, which obviously it is.
Yeah.
But there are other types of leadership. So for example, expertise, right? So there are certain people in organizations who have specialist knowledge. Without them, you can't do something, right? If you lost them, if they were hit by a bus, you'd actually be in real trouble. So that's another kind of leader, right? So you need to gather the knowledgeable people as well. The other type are the influencers, you know, the people who don't necessarily have any authority at all, may not even have a great deal of specialist knowledge, but they're liked. And if they say something or they agree with something,
so people gravitate, will just follow them.
Yeah,
like
I
the
always,
lead sheep.
Yeah, who are your Kim Kardashians? It's the phrase that I always use, right? Identify your Kim Kardashians because they need to be part of that journey as well. So when you're thinking about strategy, and we're saying, yes, it is a thing for leaders, but it's a thing for leaders of all different kinds at all different levels of the organization. And one of the mistakes that's often made when putting strategy together, aside from the way it's formatted and written and everything else that makes it unintelligible, is that they don't include those key leaders from other parts of the organization that sit outside authority figures or sit outside the hierarchy.
So you want them part of the journey, part of the consultation.
Yeah, because
have their voice heard.
Yes, in part to have their voice heard, but mostly because when you start to roll a strategy out, these are the people who are going to be doing it, right? So if they're part of the process, they understand how you arrived at it. And it's a lot easier for them to explain it to other people. And it's a key thing that's often missed in strategy, right? I remember I was at a conference once and they were working on the strategy. It was a brand new one. It was going to be presented to everyone that afternoon. And I was part of facilitating that process in terms of announcing it. I'm essentially the MC. And what happens is that I say to the people who are in charge of it, who are incidentally from Boston Consulting, right? And I said to them, well, can you tell me what the strategy is? Just so that when I introduce it, I can introduce it the right way. And they said, oh yes, there's a paper coming. In other words, I'm supposed to read some lengthy diatribe in order to understand it. You couldn't tell me like that. If you can't tell me what the strategy is, you can be pretty near certain it's going to fail.
Yeah.
So I'll give you an example, right? It's my favorite example. You know, it's my favorite example. So some of you may have heard of Vice Admiral Horatio Lord Nelson. Now, Nelson won the Battle of Trafalgar and was actually killed at the Battle of Trafalgar right at the moment of victory. So the Battle of Trafalgar, for those of you not familiar, was a conflict between the British on one side and the French and the Spanish on the other side. And Nelson was faced with a difficult situation in that the French and the Spanish had a much bigger combined navy. So their fleet was much, much bigger than Nelson's. Nelson had a smaller fleet. The way that battles at sea were fought back in the day was pretty much the same way they did it on land. They would line up either side of each other, turn broadside in this case, because all the guns are on the side of the ship, and then they start firing.
So it's a slugfest.
Yeah, as they sailed along in the same direction together so they could keep firing. Lots of problems with it. One being that it was very easy to break off the engagement and run away. So you got a lot of indecisive naval battles where there was no clear winner. But also what it meant was that if you had more guns and more ships, you were going to win.
You're going to win straight away.
It was that simple. So Nelson was faced with this problem. Nelson gathered together all his captains, right? Because the British Navy at that time was a very hierarchical system. You could get away with just authority. He didn't have to worry about Kim Kardashians on his ships. So, but he gathered together all his captains, and the strategy they came up with was this. Rather than fighting traditionally, as we always have, we're going to come up to them, rather than coming up broadside and opening up, we are actually going to form two columns and we're going to sail straight up the middle, right into the middle of them, and cause an absolute shambles, a melee. And then we're going to rely on our superior technology. They had better cannons, better guns, including a new weapon, which was a 60 cannon cannonade thing that blew things to bits, and our superior seamanship to win the day.
Yep.
Right. So the first thing to understand is that I've just explained the entire strategy for the Battle of Trafalgar in what, 10, 15 seconds?
But how, like, if it's not the traditional way, is he totally reliant on the captains and the people, like what? Because it's really breaking from the mold. It's just not cricket.
So one of the things that Nelson understood was that, you've heard the saying, that no strategy or no plan survives first contact with the enemy, right? And in our business environment, you could argue no strategy or plan survives first contact with the customer or the supplier or the employee or whatever it may be. So Nelson understood that as well. So all his captains understood what they had to do. And the one thing that he explained to his captains to really make the point, he said, if you're in any doubt, as long as you're close to an enemy ship, you're all good. In other words, get close, open up.
So it's the one-on-one.
Yeah, get one-on-one, start firing, start sailing, do what you do, right? So his captains knew what to do, even though once they got in the middle and it was going to be a mess, and they all knew all they have to do is find an enemy ship and get close. That's it, right? So that became very, very simple. If you think about D-Day, right? Remember we said all strategy, part of war. So the strategy for D-Day, remember this involves millions of troops, logistics, weapons, boats, ships, planes, huge operational planning exercise. But from a strategy point of view, quite simple, right? We're going to land on the beaches at Normandy, make the enemy think we're landing at Calais instead, and we're going to have the largest amphibious assault the world has ever seen and still ever seen, and get off the beach and establish a beachhead and take these key towns in the first however many days. That's basically it, right? So again, I can sum up the entire strategy really, really quickly. Look at how many companies that are not dealing with millions of troops, guns, planes, boats, ships, and so on.
Customers shooting at you.
Yeah, can't sum their strategy up without 100 PowerPoint slides. So you begin to see why strategy fails so readily. The second part, so the first part was, look how easy it is to explain. Look how easy it is for people to get, right? And the fact that the people below you, one, were involved in formulating it. These are the key people, our leaders, and two, knew exactly what they needed to do. What was the key thing for them to do?
So
if everything else, yeah.
So what's your goal? What do you want to achieve?
Yeah, what the military call commander's intent.
Okay.
Right. So on D-Day, get off the beach. That's it. As long as you get off the beach, we're all good. Right? It doesn't matter how you do it.
And then your other point you're making then, so get off the beach. But the other thing is, if things go wrong, everyone knows what the key objectives are. They can meet up, they can adapt.
They can figure it out. They can come up with a new plan, a new way of approaching it. And this is why it's such a mistake to have all this operational planning loaded into the strategy. I know it's where people are most comfortable, but that's also the stuff that's almost invariably not going to work. That will have to change, that will have to be adapted and developed along the way. So remember I said that strategy and leadership go together. One and the same thing.
Mm-hmm.
So think about the Nelson example. You'd be sitting there going, okay, yeah, well, where's the leadership? Here's the leadership. What's the problem with Nelson's plan? 2 columns, single file, 2 columns of ships sailing right into the middle of all the French and the Spanish ships, which are turned broadside to us, and we're going straight. All right? The flaw in the plan is they can shoot at us and we can't shoot at them all the way in. Right? So those 2 ships at the front,
they're your airbag.
Yeah, they're a problem. They're in for a very uncomfortable period of time, right? Now, what Nelson is betting is that the Spanish and the French will be so flummoxed and so put off by this audacious plan that they'll stumble and they won't get there quick enough and they won't start firing early enough and so on. But no matter what, this is not the place to be. So, whose are the 2 ships in the front? Nelson.
So he led by example.
He was in the front. So his flagship is at the front of one column, and his second in command,
the other ship
of the entire fleet, he's in the other one. So there's your leadership, right? There's how leadership and strategy go together. Don't ask people to do things you're not prepared to do yourself. That's why he won. It's also why he got killed.
So How is it though, if you're a leader at that sort of area, how far down does his trust have to go? Like, is it all about making sure he's got the right people in place as he's sort of going along? And when you're creating your strategy, he's got to rely, for example, once again, all those guys behind him are going to follow him up. They're not going to sit there and just turn tail and go.
So yeah, you're right. And remember I said before that culture and strategy have a very strong relationship. Strategy relies on culture for execution. All right. So one of the problems that you see in companies is they'll come up with some brilliant strategy, but their culture can't possibly execute it. They don't have the right people. They don't have the right attitudes. They don't have the right resources and things like that. So they've come up with this genius plan that doesn't actually fit who they are. Now, in the case of Nelson, the reason that he knew he could do that was because the culture of the British Navy had always been about superior seamanship and superior technology. So he had better guns. He had guns that he could fire faster and safer than the French and Spanish. He had better ships for the most part, more nimble, easier to maneuver. They were smaller, but you could maneuver them more quickly. And more importantly, the one thing about the British Navy, whether you volunteered to be part of the British Navy or whether you were volunteered by the British Navy to be part of the British Navy, you were taught to sail. And they had spent every single one of them years at sea, running blockades, going up and down channels and sailing in the Arctic. Nelson himself had been at sea since he was a young boy.
So they knew their trade.
Exactly. Whereas the French and the Spanish spent a lot of time in port. They only went out when it suited them. So they didn't have that same culture of seamanship. They didn't have that same experience. The British Navy was the strongest in the world for a reason. And that large part of that reason was they were always at sea. So they knew how to sail. They knew how to deal with conditions that were tough. Whereas as the French and the Spanish navies at the time, not so much. So he could rely on that. The other thing was that because of that, because they'd been at sea, because they'd been hardened by all that experience, they were a tight group, right? So when Nelson said, this is what we're going to do, everyone went, we're with you, Admiral. So that's a really, really important part of the mix, is understanding that your culture is what strategy relies on. So if culture is a bit of a mess, and we had the webinar, last time about culture and what culture is about and how culture really works, then strategy is really, really going to struggle, no matter how brilliant it is, no matter what you come up with. And again, you think about the culture that underpinned D-Day. The Allied forces, as opposed to the Axis forces, tended to be more individual in the way that they thought. You had NCOs and corporals and things like that making decisions on the battlefield. You didn't wait for an officer to tell you what to do. As an example, in the Japanese Army, that wasn't the case. You didn't have that kind of individual streak. So you're playing to your strengths all the time, but you've got to recognize what your strengths are first. And that's why culture is so important.
So bringing it back, so we've heard all around the angle of I guess, from a military, how does it then apply across into a safety strategy sort of component?
So if you break strategy down, one of the reasons that strategy is so hard for people to understand is that it's not formatted in a way that makes it easy to understand. So if the way that we tend to break it down is this: first and foremost, you need what we would call a strategic intent, right? So in a battle, it's simple. I've only got one objective, I've only got one goal. It's right in front of me. We're going to do it here and now. Now, when you're in the business world, or when you're trying to figure out how to make a workplace safer, that is not the case, right? You've got a bigger goal. You've got something that could take years, decades, even more to achieve. So you need a strategic intent. In other words, what is the ultimate outcome? Where do we ultimately want to be here, right? What are we working towards? So to use the example of World War II, very, very early on, the Allied forces, their strategic intent was unconditional surrender. That was it, right? They had no idea how
every decision was made towards that.
Yes, and that's the point, is that all subsequent decisions build towards that outcome, that utopia that you've imagined. So that's what you're trying to do. So again, strategy is ongoing. It's being redeveloped all the time. One of the things that a lot of organizations don't do is they don't go, what's the ultimate goal? So an organization that has done that is Hyundai. the car manufacturer. So when Hyundai started out, they said, we want to be the largest car manufacturer in the world. That is our strategic intent, right? From the beginning. Now, at the beginning, you would have looked at them and gone, good
No.
one.
I can still remember them when they came out and they first went into the market.
Yeah. Whereas now, you'd sit there and go, yeah, maybe.
Every step you can see. And I guess that's the other part, like you're not making cars which are just purely to hit the road. You're making cars that the consumer wants.
Yeah.
So
So
safe.
yeah. So, and this is what happens. If I'm going to be the largest car manufacturer in the world, then there's a whole bunch of things that have to happen in order for that to happen. One of which would be making cars safe, because no one's going to buy a dangerous car. We need a strong reputation for being safe, right? So you can see how having that strategic intent, having that end goal, then starts to get everything else to make sense. This is why we're doing this. This is why we need safe cars, so we can sell more cars, so we can make more cars, and therefore be the biggest car manufacturer in the world.
And that's a big, bold goal as well.
Yes. And there are two things that are important about it. The first one is there's no time frame. They didn't say in 20 years, in 30 years, it doesn't matter. The point is we're going to get, if it takes 200 years, we don't care. That's where we're going, right? So don't put timeframes on that strategic intent, because it is audacious. It is big. The second point is they had no idea how they were going to do it. But that didn't matter because they believed they could. And this is one of the other problems with strategic intent. When you're imagining that happy place, that perfect place to be, don't get confused by, I don't know how I'm going to do it, therefore it's not realistic. Just sit there and go, do we believe that this is possible? Right? So you might say, for example, in a safe workplace safety type scenario, what's our strategic intent? It might be that we have no serious accidents ever.
And you've defined it quite clearly there by serious.
Yes. So what I'm doing was, when we come up with the intent, while there's no time frame, what you do want to make sure of is that it is measurable. So you want the language to be precise enough that I can go, okay, what do I mean by serious? And you can have grades of injury, right? That say, well, essentially paper cuts are okay, but missing arms are not, whatever it may be. And you can, and therefore you can measure it. So you know when you get there. So with Hyundai, right? Biggest car manufacturer in the world, I'll know when I get there because I know how many cars we make and I know how many everyone else makes. So
clearly measurable all the time.
Exactly. Because if it's not measurable, there's no point, because you won't know when you get there. So this is the problem with a lot of, again, a lot of strategies that have very wishy-washy, not concrete language. You just get confused by what it is you're really supposed to do, because it doesn't really make sense. And how would I know when I've achieved it, and so on and so forth.
Or it's so big.
Yeah. So that's important. Have that intent. Understand what it is you're working towards, because whatever it is, you're not going to achieve it in year 1 or 2 or 3 or 4 or 5. Not if it's worthwhile. Not if it's truly the optimal situation. So the reason that you need that is because that binds successive strategies together. And so one of the problems that we see in the corporate world, you see this very, very often, is someone will do a 5-year strategy, right? And they're coming towards the end of their 5-year plan, and they realize we've now got to do the next 5-year plan. So they'll start working on that. Now, there'll be things in the previous 5-year plan that have not been completed yet. So what do you do with those?
You just roll them over, wouldn't you?
Well, that would be the logical thing to do. But 9 times out of 10, the companies don't do that. They just ignore them. They abandon them because they've got their new 5-year plan. It doesn't matter that they didn't finish. So what you get is a lot of people, again, who get put off by strategy because they see this pattern being repeated all the time. You said this was important. Now suddenly it isn't. Something else is important. Why didn't we finish that? Why didn't we complete that?
And from an influence point of view, like what happens if one of those actions are the ones the influencers are really loving? It's just left behind as well.
Well, this is it. And this is where people start to feel ignored. They start to feel that they're not valued. They start to feel lied to, right? You told us this was important. We're working towards it. And now we've just abandoned it and moved on to something else. So one of the issues here is that when you're formulating strategy, once you understand your intent, you have to pay close attention to your objective. So what is the thing that we're trying to achieve in this particular time frame? one thing.
I was about to say, because you said objective there,
Yes.
not objectives.
No. And the reason for that is that now your objective could have multiple parts in it, right? But what we're saying is write it as one objective, one thing. Because if you write it as 2 or 3 things, these are the things that we want to achieve in the next 12 months, the next 2 years, whatever it may be. Incidentally, we have an opinion on what that time frame should be, and it should be 12 months. Because in our part of the world, everything we do in the business environment is predicated on 12 months. Your budgets are 12 months. Your forecasts, all your resourcing, all your prioritization is all made on the basis of the next financial year. So why wouldn't you have a strategy that did that too? Therefore, you're doing strategy more often. Therefore, maybe because you're doing it more often, perhaps you'll think strategically. So
it's always this reset, because things are always changing.
Yeah.
But what about, because in some cases, it's a bigger picture. There's this, and we spoke about this earlier, about potential instead of something which is always over the horizon, you're always going for, obviously it's a goal you're always going, which might be more of a government focus or other sort of areas. Do we talk about like intent from the point of view of reducing deaths and serious injuries, for example?
Yeah, but by how much?
By how much?
Because you need to be able to.
So that the goal would be, say, like the current national safety strategy talks about 30%. Is it more of an intent, which you mentioned, the chat, or should it be a strategy?
So the intent. So this is where it gets interesting for a lot of people. There are some situations in which a strategy is not so much what's required, because you're not going anywhere. So remember I said to you, it's taking a whole bunch of things that are spread out, resources and people over a distance, leading them towards a particular goal. Now, where strategy gets a little bit tricky is, what if the goal would never change, right? From year to year, not just the intent, but literally you think about a lot of semi-government type organizations, which are in largely support type roles, where they're just providing a level of service and they just want to reach as many people as they possibly can. And that never really changes. So sometimes in those situations, you don't want to be redoing strategy all the time, because it doesn't make any sense. Nothing's really going to change. You want to think of it more as having a strategic direction that doesn't change, and then focus all of your attention on operational or business planning, into the detail, into the minutiae, prioritizing things. What are we going to do right now in the context of strategic direction, which doesn't change? Because one of the things about the objectives that we said is that if the objective doesn't really change, then you need more of a strategic direction, right? If the objective does change because you're building to something bigger and it's incremental, then you're back in strategy land. And the basic difference between those, one's being redone all the time and one isn't. One gets done and it's set and it's there and it's part of everything you do, whereas the other one is part of everything you do for a period of time, and then you redo it and you come up with a different objective that's moving you a little bit closer. One of the reasons that we said one objective too is because if you have a multi-part objective, if you have 3 things we want to achieve, you're going to put those in a list, 1, 2, 3, right?
And you'll do your preferred.
Which means that you've prioritized them, whether you intended to or not. And human nature means that we're all doing the same thing. So invariably what happens is that people go, oh, 3 doesn't really matter. If things are a bit tough, we'll just get 1 and 2 done, or we'll get 1 or 2 done. So you want to write it so it's one thing. We're aiming to achieve this one thing. And guess what? Because it's an objective, it's non-negotiable. This is the point. There is no, oh, we did 60% of it, so all good.
It's all about the other 40.
Yeah, you have to write something that that can be achieved in the time frame you've set, ideally 12 months.
So that really brings it right back to being quite specific, instead of saying over a decade.
That's right. So one of the issues, because governments love to do this, right? Governments love to, you'll see this at budget time, where they'll go, oh, we're going to spend, $10 billion over the next 20 years. How much am I getting this year? Oh, nothing, right? How much am I getting 3 years from now? Oh, it doesn't start until year 4. Oh, so I've got to re-elect you before I even get a sniff at this.
Yep.
Right. So blowing things out like that is a great way of pretending you're doing something while you're really doing nothing. What you've got to do is break it down into the achievable parts. So if you've got a particular initiative that you want to undertake that is going to take you 3 years to do, well, in your strategy, what's year 1?
So that's like actually little initiatives.
Yeah.
What are the steps? What are you going to go through?
Yeah. So if you get an objective, that's going to break down into initiatives, right? So here are areas that we're going to have to do things in, areas where we're going to have to achieve something, right? And then that's going to break down into tasks. What are the actual things we have to do? So you can see what I'm laying out here. It's really simple. Here's the strategic intent. This is where we're going in totality. Here's the objective right now. This is the thing that we must achieve in the next 12 months, 2 years, whatever you want to do. If you don't like my idea of going 12 months, you can go a bit longer. But it's non-negotiable. That's what we're going to do. Here are the areas where we're going to have to focus and the broad achievements we're going to have to make in each of these areas, like marketing, maybe safety might be another one. Operations, they tend to be those kinds of things. Maybe it's funding, maybe it's revenue, and so on. And then those are going to break down into tasks, specific things that have to be done by specific people. All right. So when people go, well, do you need timeframes? Well, if you've gone 12 months, that's your timeframe. Get it done.
And you've got a name next to it as well.
Exactly. You know who's in charge of that. You know whose job that is, and let them figure out how to do it. Don't try to tell them how to do it at the strategic level, because that just gives me a whole bunch of stuff to read that's going to make me lose the will to live. Right? If I'm in charge of something, presumably it's because I'm the expert. When Nelson got the plan together, he didn't then go from ship to ship to explain the plan. He didn't try to captain every single ship. He just said to every captain, all right, you know what to do. If it really gets messy, just get as close to an enemy ship as you can and you're all good. Now it's up to them. And sitting below them, they would have key people that they would explain what needs to be done, and they're relaying the same message and so on. So you can see that one of the reasons that strategy fails is because it doesn't have this logical flow. It doesn't have this ability to navigate through it. Right? Don't think about reading a strategy. I should be able to navigate, particularly in this, the world we live in. I should be able to go, here's my intent, and then I can click on the objective. And then I can go, oh, what are the initiatives? And I can click on each one of those and go, oh, here are the tasks. I'm all good.
And all of them are feeding back up, and they're all aligning with your intent at the beginning.
Yeah, and you can keep track of your progress really easily, because every task is worth a certain amount to contribute to the completion of initiative, and every initiative is worth a certain amount to completing the objective. So you can track it quite simply. The only tricky bit is you need to weight your tasks, right? Don't fall into the trap of thinking, let's say there's something I need to achieve, and there are 10 things I have to do, right? Those 10 things are not of equal value, right? Because 7 of them might be administrative things, really quick and easy things that I can knock off in a month. And the last 3 are actually the hard work. So don't sit there going, I've done my first month and I've knocked off 7, I'm 70% done. No, you're not.
You've got the low-hanging fruit, but you're the hard work to come.
That's right. So measure it properly. Understand where the work really sits, and make sure that you're weighting your completion towards those. And again, a lot of strategies have traffic light systems. It's started, it's in progress, it's finished. No, everything's in progress. It's either done or it isn't. Let's not kid ourselves. Right? Have you finished or not? Because then you get a more accurate measure of where you're at. And you don't give people the opportunity to hide. You can just go, you've not finished yet. Why not? What's wrong? What's gone? What's happening? Right? It lets you focus in on things that matter. So it's getting people to understand that much of our strategy, the way we write it, the way we present it, the way we formulate it, the people we include, it's almost all wrong. And then we wonder why it doesn't work. And then when you get into things like safety, you've got competing issues. So a safety strategy will normally be part of a bigger strategy, right? So that bigger strategy will have its own objective, right? Well, it has to see safety in that. If it doesn't, then safety is just box ticking. It's just someone doing compliance. It's not real, right? If it's not part of the bigger strategy, well, then they don't really care about safety. Otherwise it'd be there, wouldn't it? If you think about the Hyundai example again, safety will be part of their strategy. Why? Because they want to be the biggest car manufacturer in the world. They can't be the biggest car manufacturer in the world if they don't make safe cars. They also can't be the biggest car manufacturer in the world if they don't have a safe workplace. because they won't be able to hire people if everyone knows that everyone keeps getting killed at their plant or hurt.
No one will go there, right?
Exactly.
Yep.
You won't get the best talent, and on it goes. But the key is that safety isn't important in and of itself. I wish it was, but the reality is the human race is just not that evolved.
But it's one of the cogs. It's a key cog.
But it's important because it has a commercial benefit. And that's one of the realities that we live in for the most part, right? We all love to talk about safety, but how many companies actually resource safety properly? How many companies see it as an important part of their commercial objectives, of their revenues, of cutting down costs and so on, versus, well, we better tell people we care.
And I'd love to know what other people think about some of the opinions and ideas that Brett's put forward. And I know one of the areas we're drawing a little bit is looking at, I guess, eco-safe, the linking together. And there's this attitude, some companies have the idea as either or. But once again, you look them together, they actually work very closely together.
Yeah, and this is one of the things, right? Is that, you know, you could make an argument that being safe should be key to just about anything you're doing in any environment.
That's why you retain workers, because they stay alive.
Yeah. So what happens then, and I think this is one of the things that I find a little bit concerning in a way, is that safety is often stripped out on its own, as if it's not connected to anything else, right? And whereas in actual fact, wouldn't it, as a general rule of thumb, unless something has gone horribly, horribly wrong, safety should never be sitting at that initiative level. Surely it should always be at the task level and sitting underneath every initiative. There should be an element of, you know, so if you're breaking it down, marketing, right? Well, how do we do that safely? Because that might be about mental health and the way we make people feel and the way we identify people and things like that. Operationally, well, that might be more about a physical health and things like that, and safety, and how do we keep our people safe? And then the product itself, is that safe? You know, it should be sitting in everywhere. And to me, in some ways, it almost represents a strategic failure that it's often sitting out on its own, as if it doesn't belong to any of these other things. And in fact, quite often, a lot of our safety initiatives are obscure. You know, we were chatting about this the other day, is the classic, what do they call them? The safety meetings that you have.
The toolbox talks.
Toolbox talks or toolbox meetings. Okay. Why aren't they called what they are? Why isn't it called a safety meeting or a health and safety meeting or a health and safety talk? Or what? In other words, why have we created this euphemism around it? What purpose does that serve? And it's because someone somewhere thought, oh, that'll be cool. Let's call it that. But it doesn't. Yeah, but it doesn't need to be cool, does it? You know, straight away it strips away its importance. If I come to this without any knowledge at all, I'm sitting there going, why are we having a meeting about toolboxes? What's the point of that?
To be a newcomer, whereas, yeah.
Right? It just, there's no logic to that. Why does it have to be dressed up? Why do we have to give it a cool or a funky sounding name rather than say what it really is and why it matters and what's really important, why we do these things? You know, who are we including? At what point does this, again, just become a box ticking exercise where we can go, oh, we had the toolbox meeting, we had the toolbox talk. Oh, good. What did you talk about? Oh, I don't know, I can't remember.
I switched off.
Yeah, I gave up. I don't pay attention to these things. I just turn up because if I don't, I get into trouble, and on it goes. See, we don't give things their due importance.
Which is back to that point, I guess, people right at the coalface, the drivers, people working, understanding the intent for it all is to keep you safe at work, so we can go about delivering, meeting our goals, growing the company, deliverables right up to the very top. Yeah,
as we've talked about, you know, so if you think about being safe, right? So being safe is an idea. It's a way of working. We talked about this when we did our culture webinar before. So if you want an idea to be able to spread, there's a bunch of things that idea needs to have as part of it, right? In order for human beings to adopt it and for it to work. The first one is that said idea needs to make sense. It sounds silly, but you've got to actually pay attention to how you frame that idea, how you explain what safety means, why being safe matters, or why certain things are unsafe, why you might be in danger, why that might be a problem. right? If that doesn't make sense to me, then I'm not going to buy into it. The second thing, obviously, is that in addition to making sense, it actually has to be part of my worldview in the first place.
So the values have to align.
Yeah, exactly. Because if I don't think safety is important in general, then I'm not going to buy into the safety initiatives or strategies that you put in front of me. It's going to be a really, really hard sell, right? So, you know, the example we used last time, you get a lot of people who are anti-vaccination, for example, to choose something topical and slightly controversial. But if you dig into it, what you really find is they're not so much anti-vax, they're anti-government. They don't trust the government. They don't believe anything the government says, or they think they're out to get them. You see a lot of this in the US, right? So as a consequence, when the government says you have to have a vaccination, or we're mandating vaccinations, they naturally rebel against that. They don't even have to understand what the vaccination is or what it's for. Their whole problem is the government told me to do it, therefore I'm not going to. So it has to be something that already fits in their worldview. They have to see safety as being important in the first place. So again, we would say to people, pay attention to recruitment, right?
At the very beginning, it's getting the right people into your organization.
Yep. Third thing is that it has to be relevant, right? So one of the issues that we have when we look at things like safety, and when you're creating safety campaigns, or when you're putting together programs and things like that, one of the biggest mistakes that are made is that we have a one-size-fits-all sort of policy, right? So we will treat safety the same way for the bloke sitting in the truck as for the person sitting in the office. Well, most of what the truck driver needs to pay attention to from a safety perspective is not the same as what the office person needs to pay attention to. So if you teach the same stuff to them and the same examples, then for a period of time, you're hitting them with a whole bunch of stuff that's not relevant to what they do every day. So what do we all do when we're faced with things that aren't relevant? We switch off. We find other stuff to do. We stare out the window. We start texting. We muck around with their computers, right? All those kinds of things. So make sense, fit your worldview, be relevant, be beneficial.
What do you mean by beneficial?
In other words, what's in it for me?
The why.
Yeah. What am I getting out of this?
Yep.
What's the reward? Right? There's got to be, now, for the more philosophical amongst us, the idea that you get to go home in the same condition you arrived in might be enough, hopefully. Yes. But there'll be a lot of people for whom that's not enough. There'll be people, how often do we, for example, financially reward people for doing safe things, for doing the right thing? And we love punishing people for doing the wrong thing, but we don't pay a lot of attention to the people doing the right thing. How often do we recognize them for doing those things? The pat on the back, the employee of the month.
And quite often it's simple things. Because I know we did an incentives paper touching on exactly that. It's these little, as you said, just congratulations, thank you.
Yeah.
So one example, if you have near-miss reporting and people put this in and they see nothing ever happen from it, well, why would I keep doing it?
Yeah. So which leads to the last thing, it has to be supported. Mm-hmm. So everywhere. So if you want safety to be a strategy that works for you, then as we said, safety actually needs to be part of the whole strategy, not sitting out on its own, not its own thing. It's got to be, you've got to show, if you think of this if you're trying to get safety across the executive, right? Because as we know, most, all due respect to those of you who are tuning in, thank you for doing so, most people who are in charge of safety are not that high on the totem pole as a general rule of thumb, right? You're not exactly sitting around the executive bathroom together and chatting about things. So you're often trying to sell things to them.
You're pushing up.
Yeah, you're pushing up. So you need to be able to show them how safety relates to the broader strategy, not just how it's important in and of itself. How does this make us more money? How does this save us more money? How does this make us more competitive? How does this improve our reputation or our brand? Because those are the things that they're concerned with. For those of you who are in manufacturing environments, I don't know if you've checked the stats, but there are very few CEOs that are involved in industrial accidents, right? Not terribly relevant to their day-to-day, is it? And guess what? They also don't have to tell the relatives of someone who's been involved in industrial accident either. That all happens much lower. So not relevant to them a lot of the time.
And I remember, and that's a very interesting point. 'Cause I remember there was one with a board mandate. They said the CEO in the direct line has to go. This is a US company, and there was a number of fatalities were happening.
Yep.
And they board mandated the CEO and direct line goes to all funerals.
There you go.
They went to 3 in a row in a few months, and things began changing quite dramatically.
And that's the point. See, supported everywhere. So you see things put in place that says safety matters. You see things, and not just posters on the wall and stuff like that, but literally every way of working reflects these ideas. The language is everywhere. We always talk about safety. We always talk about health. We don't bury it behind a term like toolbox.
Well, I remember we did a webinar with a fellow, Keith Hoskins, a while back when he was at APA.
Yep.
And one of those powerful points he makes is that we always tell workers, said, if you see something dangerous, stop, you have a voice, put it up there. And he goes, one of his most concerning measures was, he goes, I never see these reports come up. How many workers are stopping? Because he goes, the size of our company, the exposure where they're working, there's got to be things popping up. But how empowered do the workers feel in doing it?
Yeah, well, but even more to the point is not only are they willing to put their hand up, and say,
Yeah.
hey, I've seen something, but do they actually believe that anything will be done? And this is one of the
Which
things.
goes back to that support point.
Yeah, and the benefits. What do I get for putting my hand up? What do I get for telling on someone or identifying a problem that other people have clearly ignored? Because I can't be the only one that saw it. This is the whole point. And this is where strategy just goes so horribly wrong. The more that we carve strategy off, the more that we pretend that everything isn't connected, that it sits on its own, in much the same way that plenty of companies separate strategy and leadership. They deal with them separately as if they're different too. They're not.
Yeah, they want them both.
Yeah, so you should be going, all right, what's our overall strategy, which will always have some sort of commercial imperative, including those of you who work in the public service, because, I don't know, again, you'll notice that the way that government tends to justify the things it funds is with a body count. So you don't think of dollars so much, you think of numbers of people. How many people have we taken through the program? How many lives have we saved? How many jobs have we created? On and on it goes. So it's not different to how many dollars we made. It's the same kind of problem. So when you're laying all that out, you need a strategy that addresses all these things, and you need to recognize that safety has to play a part in all of those components, that it doesn't just sit out on its own. If you're doing a safety strategy in and of itself, I would suggest that already says there's a problem.
Well, and as well, like from the National Road Safety Strategy, one of the great things seeing in that is actually the view of how do we incorporate road safety into everything. So once again, it's not the standalone element. How do we get everyone sort of begin thinking about, well, where does this fit in relation to what I do every day, on business, community, all those sort of components, instead of just being, well, is it off by itself?
Which is why, as we said, the worldview thing becomes so important, because if I don't think, driving safely, if that's not something I do outside of work, why would I do it inside of work?
And yes, I've had some good conversations about that of late with some organisations saying that's not a big opportunity to market yourselves. Our workers drive safe for us and amongst the community.
Yeah, and again, but see, and this is the point, right? You frame that as a way of saying, look, we can improve our reputation, our brand, our
marketing.
Exactly. You put a commercial, as distasteful as it will be to a lot of people in our audience at the moment. That's where the human race is at. Altruism is extremely rare. Most of us do things because we want to be recognized for it, because we want to be rewarded for it. Companies are exactly the same. Governments are largely exactly the same too. Don't forget, whether you work in the private sector or in the public sector, everyone went to the same universities, the same schools. They all taught the same things.
Well, and then the last point you have, which raised in this, is how we're going to communicate our plan. So how crucial is that?
Well, it's everything. And again, a lot of that comes down to how it's formatted in the first place. If you lay it out where you've got strategic intent, bearing in mind you generally set that once and you're done. It's just a way of framing successive strategies so people can see the relationship they have and how they build towards each other. And then you just want to go very simply, here's our objective. This is what we're aiming to do. Non-negotiable. We must achieve this. So be very careful about what you write and whether or not it's achievable in the first place. Don't write things you know you can't do in the time frame. And then break that down, right? So in order to do that, what would have to happen? Right? That's what we call initiatives. Just very broadly, what are the key things that would have to happen that if I ticked all those, this objective is met, right? And then for each of those key things that need to happen, those initiatives, all right, what are the tasks that have to happen? What are the things that have to be done in order for that initiative to be completed? That's quite a simple, logical relationship.
No, I think it's a very and I think, and then next to it, who's going to do it?
Yeah, who's in charge of doing that? And your time frame kind of takes care of itself, right? And then they can start breaking down into their little groups and go, okay, well, how do we prioritize what needs to be done? Because most of these things have relationships. Most of them are interrelated. You've got to do one thing before you can do another, or two things have to happen at once in order for a third thing to occur, and so on. So you work that out. But the people at the coalface know that. They'll be able to work that out for you. They just need to understand what the bigger picture is. What are we aiming to achieve somewhere else? So that they know what they're working towards. So if you lay those things out, then it becomes very easy for people to actually digest that information. One of the things I see in strategies all the time, strategic pillars. All right, people out there may have noticed those. And I always go, well, what are they? And they go, well, they're our strategic pillars. You go, okay, but what are they for? Oh, well, they're the things our strategy is based on. Mm-hmm. And what do you do with that? I don't know. It's just fluff, right? At its core, all strategy is behavioral.
So do the pillars or those themes, does it make it easier for groups to identify where they sit, or is it just confusion?
It's usually just confusion because you don't understand what it is you're supposed to do with them.
Okay.
Again, if I don't understand what I'm supposed to do with them, why are they there? If you could make a clear link for me, all good. But when have you ever seen that? I haven't. Most of the time, again, it's just, I'm sure people get paid by the PowerPoint slide to make this stuff. That's why there's so many. Usually it's just fluff. You see the same thing, oftentimes you'll see inside a strategy. You'll see things like a SWOT analysis. What for? That may well inform the strategy, but it's not part of it. It doesn't.
It's part of the research and developing it.
Exactly. You'll see research in there as well. Well, we went and talked to all the clients. Yeah, okay, great. And that you can bring that to the session when we try to formulate the strategy. Think back to Nelson at Trafalgar. Can you imagine him? Well, before we figure out what we're going to do, gentlemen, let's analyze our strengths and our weaknesses and our opportunities and our threats, shall we? No, he already knew that. That's the point. That's why he was in charge. That information was already there. He'd already done his homework. It's not seen as something you do for the strategy. You're supposed to already know that.
Yes.
Right? And so, well, let's go and find out what our clients think. Why? The clients don't care generally. Not in the same way you do. One of the things that we see in the research world is people love the idea, oh, we want to go and find out what all the people who aren't our customers think. They don't think about you at all. That's why they're not your customer.
Because you're a customer.
Why don't you find out what your existing customers think so you can attract more people like that? Wouldn't that be more sensible? So, and this is what we do. We gravitate towards things that just inherently don't make a lot of sense because no one's actually thought about it and thought it through. Pillars being one of them. Why are they there? What are you supposed to do with them? How are pillars behavioral? How do pillars tell me what I am supposed to do in order to achieve that objective? And that's the whole issue with just about all strategy. I can't see what I'm supposed to do. If I can't see what I'm supposed to do, the strategy is doomed to fail. And
you need that all the way through.
Yeah. Just logically laid out so you can see where it is. I can see at every level, right? So if you think of strategic intent is more like a vision, right? It's like, where do we ultimately want to be? Another thing that I see a lot of companies do is they confuse vision with purpose.
How's that?
Vision is an outcome. Purpose is a behavior, right? So if you think about, what's a popular professional services one? We want to be the trusted advisor for all our clients. They love that kind of thing.
Yep.
Right. Okay. So that's an outcome. That's how you're perceived, how you're seen, how you're judged. Okay. So the company can do that, right? The senior people in the company potentially can do that too, the partners and so on, if you're thinking about an accounting firm. As a receptionist, can I do that?
No.
Right? If I'm the janitor, can I do that?
No.
No. If I'm pretty much anyone below the most senior level, can I do that?
No.
No. So it doesn't make sense in sort of saying, well, that's our purpose, to be the trusted advisor. No. If you said to me, your purpose is to care, or your purpose, a verb of some description, that I can do at every level, no matter who I am. That's the difference. So what you see is a lot of companies confusing the two, saying this is our purpose. And what they've actually done is given you a vision. They've given you an outcome that not everyone can do, that not everyone can contribute to. They're different.
So then getting once again, the buying right the way down, like you mentioned, the receptionist, the janitor, getting them all striving towards the strategic intent.
Yes, all understanding the bit
Yep.
they have to play
And
getting
achieving that goal.
Yeah, exactly. So again, go back to Nelson at Trafalgar. There's sailors. There are sailors at the bottom of the boat who've got a job to do, who don't see daylight, but they all understand this is the part I play in getting us into the middle of the French and Spanish fleet, creating a shambles, superior seamanship and weaponry will win the day. And I've got to do this bit in order for that to happen. I've got to fire this gun in order for that to happen. I've got to steer, I've got to keep the sail taut, whatever it may be. They all understand where they're going, and they all understand that they have a small part to play.
But this is a crucial part in the entire cog of the system. Yes,
because any one of those small parts is missing, you're not going to be as effective. It won't work quite as much. And if they do look up, the fifth ship down the line, if they happen to look up at the front, they see the flagship and the admiral
leading the way.
Yeah, not at the back, not pushing.
Yes.
And again, this is why we did this as a separate webinar, because it's such a wide-ranging topic. What does lead mean?
It's a good way to close out. What does lead mean?
So a leader has always been a guide, right? So the origins of the term is to guide someone or something. Now, generally, you guide from the front, don't you? If you're on a trek,
makes sense.
You've got a guide. They're at the front. We're going this way. Follow me. Going down here. Follow me, and so on. And I always think that it's really helpful for those people who are in leadership positions, as I'm sure a lot of you are. It's really helpful to think of leadership as a verb. Think of it as a verb.
Okay.
Right? It's about what you do, not a noun, not what you're called. Right? So what are you doing? How is it that you're leading people? What is it, if you make it a verb, if it's all about what you do, you'll be in a much better space.
So once again, look at the actions that you've created, that what you've done to inspire, to bring others along. Yeah. So you're leading by example.
Yes. Yeah. And that's the whole issue with strategy, is that it's inextricably bound up in leadership. And the problem that we get into it is we treat it as this thing that just sits somewhere off in the distance, that it's a theoretical thing. It's not a practical thing. Strategy has always been practical. Strategy has always literally just been, well, we want to get here. We're currently here. We need a plan.
And how are we going to do that?
And how we're going to pull everyone and everything to get to there. So, stay in that space. Don't get sucked into pillars and things like that. Make it as simple as it should be. You should be able to explain your strategy on anything in about 30 seconds or less.
Which is why I guess when we did the piece, it was like that. It's just, this is how you apply the KISS principle. Keep it simple, stupid.
Yeah. Because there's plenty of stupid to go around. So.
Well, we've had a fantastic discussion today, Brett. I know we didn't have any sort of questions come through, but I hope, look, if people are intrigued to know more or want to reach out, please do. I think I've learned an enormous amount going through strategy, and I've been reflecting our own organisation we've gone through and how we've sort of what we need to achieve. And one point we did make is the goal for NRSPP, and I guess I know the surgeons say the same sort of thing would be, look, we're out of business because there is no more road trauma. That'd be the ultimate goal in this sphere we're in.
And that's a really good way of thinking for the National Road Safety Partnership Program. It's a great way of thinking of your strategic intent.
Yeah.
To no longer exist because we're not needed. So it's amazing how many charities have never considered that.
So not existing is a good thing.
Yep, could well be.
So thank you so much for your time today, Brett. An hour flew by very quickly then. So thank you very much to our audiences, and I hope you can join us for a future one. We have Alan Pincock coming up next month around heavy vehicle rollovers, and we have another amazing one getting set up for September as well. So thank you very much for joining us today. Thank you very much, Brett.
Thank you.
And all the best.